Welcome to Washington Policy on the Go. My name is David Bose. I'm the Communications Director for Washington Policy Center. And this is a special edition of our Washington Policy on the Go. One, the legislative session is now officially over. The governor's done. He's not signing or vetoing anything else. So the entire 2025 legislative session is officially put to rest. That said, that doesn't mean there's not aftermath of what happened over the course of the session. There's got to be consequences for that going on for some time. And we'll continue to talk about those consequences and what the largest tax increase in state history means for you and your family and for your business. And we'll keep track of how it impacts, state metrics. Too often when policies are passed, nobody asks, how do we measure the success or failure of that policy? And in fact, it's mostly measured in the headlines. Was it politically popular? Did it get some praise among your base? But the question of whether or not it worked is a separate one. And we'll be looking at whether or not certain things work according to those who advocated them. But today we have our special guest, who is Greg Lane, Executive Vice President of the BIAW, the Building Industry Association of Washington. And we want to talk about housing and affordable housing, affordability being one of the top concerns among Washingtonians right now, and rightfully so. But it's not just the grocery costs, but it's also the rent costs and the housing costs and the inability of people to get into those starter homes. We're going to talk about why that's happening. We're going to talk about the situation that we're in, take a look at how extensive the problem is in Washington state, and we'll take a look at some of the efforts to alleviate that this session, and we'll talk about some of the things that may have made it worse, as well as take a look at the story concerning the initiative on natural gas, one of the successful initiatives where the people spoke loud and clear that they wanted natural gas protected as an energy resource in Washington state. So we'll talk about all those things. Greg, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you, David. Hope you had a great Memorial Day weekend, and pleased to be here.
I've got 4 kids. They're busy every weekend. So by the end of any weekend, I'm wondering, was it a 3 or 4 day weekend? I'm not sure. So that's how mine worked out, and to you as well. Let's start with taking a look at an interactive map that's on your website here that shows where Washington counties stand when it comes to affordable housing and housing affordability, how Puget Sound counties fare versus Eastern Washington counties, and take a look at that interactive feature there. And you can see, that on the metric there, the dark blue represents places that are essentially unaffordable to over 60%, I believe, of the people that are working and living there. And then the lighter it gets, the more affordable the housing is. And when I looked at this for the first time, my first reaction was basically what we're saying is we have a severe housing affordability problem in the counties in which people actually live, because those light counties are where the vast majority of that is extremely rural and very little development anyway. The rest of these counties where there's big problems are where the bulk of our population lives. Describe how this map functions and what it's telling us.
So the Housing Center, the Washington Center for Housing Studies, is a research center that we created at BIAW, and the primary component of it is what we call this Washington Housing Attainability Index or Affordability Index. And every quarter we measure basically the percentage of people in every county and statewide can afford a mortgage for a medium price home in the state of Washington. So statewide, the medium price home and this is not new construction, but all housing is just under $600,000. And only 20% of Washington residents can afford a mortgage for a medium price home now. That's as low as it has ever been in this state. And we'll talk about the factors that have, caused that. But to us, that's extremely alarming. And I think it should be alarming to everybody. Now, really only the very rich, it's not even upper middle income families can now afford a home anymore. And if you go, county by county, you'll see that in some counties it's as low as 14 or 15% of the population can afford a medium priced home in their locality. And in some counties it's a little higher. Some counties do a little better, as you say, as you get into the more rural areas where there's fewer, more land is devoted to natural resources or ag. There's not as much housing, there's not as much population. You'll see the numbers are a little bit better. But in any of the population centers, Spokane, Clark County, and you can see in the upper northwest part of the state in particular, we're getting to the point now where people can't afford to own homes. And, as a policy for local communities and for our state, when we trap more and more people into rental opportunities, and rental is a big part of the housing market. I'm not saying that, but people need the ability to move out of rental into home ownership to have a healthy housing market and to have a healthy economy. It's home ownership that provides the economic benefits that that families enjoy. Generational wealth, building wealth, comes from home ownership. You can't accomplish that if you're stuck renting well into your 30s or 40s, and that's what we're trapping these latest generations. My kids and my grandkids are not going to be able to afford to get into a home until later and later in life, and that's really has a lot of consequences for our social fabric, our community fabric, and policymakers really need to understand what's going on and the changes and the implications of it.
Yeah, no, I can just imagine the spillover effects that would have as they acquire that wealth through home ownership, and the equity of home ownership. If you wait too long, it makes it much more difficult to build up that equity over time and retire better.
Yes.
To have the resources you need to care for yourself in an elderly life, and that's going to put a further strain on the state. So there's all kinds of spillover social and economic consequences to what you're describing here. One more thing about the map, we don't have to show it again, but how did you define, whether or not someone could afford it? Because it used to be that it was recommended your mortgage wouldn't be more than a third, say, of your income. And now people are saying, well, we can go up to a half or even 60%. Where did you guys come down on that?
Yeah, we did 35%. So we calculate the median income for families in a county, the median price of a home. And obviously, the rise in interest rates have really impacted that as well. Actually, the median price of a home has dropped some in the state of Washington. It's dropped by about $50,000 over the last year and a half or so. But because we've had the dramatic increase in interest rates, it's more difficult to qualify. So, but that doesn't change the fundamental problem, and that is we now have the third highest median price home in the entire country. The only two states that are ahead of us are California and Hawaii, and we do not want to get past those states. We really need to address this, and it's driven by a dramatic shortage in the number of housing units in the state of Washington. So it's simple economics. Housing prices are complex, and I will grant that there are a lot that goes into them. But when you are 250,000 units short of of housing units of what you should have for your population, when you have that level of constraint on the housing supply, that's what's driving ultimately the costs up. And we need to build more housing units of all types. We need more rental housing. We need more condos. In particular, condos are a huge part that we have constrained on unconditional. We've put huge constraints on condo development over the last 20 years in this state, which has caused a problem. And then the lack of land availability, the constraint on available land through growth management and the urban growth boundaries available for construction of new single family homes on smaller lots. We can build density, but the constraint on that has driven those costs up in addition to other regulations that we can get into. But it's that constraint on supply in particular, which is the huge problem that's driving costs up for people.
Before we get into what, some of the housing facts that you've set up,
Yeah,
I did want to ask you a quick follow-up on, we've got this 250,000 unit deficit basically based on where we are right now. And I take it that's building all the time because we're falling farther and farther behind
we are.
with every passing day. So let's say, some miracle occurred, we wave this wand. How long would it take to catch up with a 250,000 deficit in housing?
Well, they're predicting that we need another 2 million units to be built over the next 20 years or 25 years to get to 2050. And we only build between 40 and 50,000 units a year anyway. So we're never going to catch up at that rate. We're only going to fall further behind. And so policymakers really need to address this situation immediately and make changes. And they have made some changes. We can go through a few of the bills that have made some improvements, but really all we're doing is approving small things around the margins until we get into substantial reform of the Growth Management Act and the constraints that puts on housing supply. We are not going to get this issue addressed, and it's only going to get worse. Right now, we are last in the entire country, 51st, even behind Washington, D.C., in the number of housing units per capita. And that tells you all you need to know, really.
Okay, so let's bring up slide 2. This is the housing facts that we have that your organization has put together here.
Yes.
And it shows, some of the key areas where our state is it's struggling in many
Yes.
different ways. And I'm sure it's not just us, but as you point out, California and Hawaii and Washington State, we're giving ourselves some big problems here. 80% of the families can't afford a home. The median household income, you're talking about mid 90,000s. Um, this over and over again, you can see where this problem kind of compounds on itself here. The housing shortage, as you pointed out, 250,000 plus, we're kind of doing a rounding error there. And then what about this add of $1,100 for each week of delay? Where does that come in and how would that delay be defined?
Right. So that gets into when we're going through the permit process for citing just a typical home, and then also the delay in inspections and occupancy ultimately for a home to be built. So every week of delay, those carry forward costs is what they're called, that the builder is carrying that house before they can sell it, adds another $1,100 onto the cost of the home, which of course then is passed on to the buyer. So when a permit process is delayed for what can be an average of a year to 18 months in some Puget Sound counties, that alone is adding $20,000 onto the price of a home. When if you go to other parts of the country, they're able to get through the permit process in just a couple of short weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. You can see the difference that has ultimately adding to the extra price. So that's worked into, regulation and permit processing delays at the local level. So we've got state regulations that add in the cost of the home. We also have local impact fees and then permit process delays that add costs as well, which are all passed on to the consumer at the end.
Well, we'll take a look at some of those regulations and fees in a minute too, but I wanted to highlight the purchase price
Yeah.
factoid you have there on housing. What you're showing, what we just talked about how before ground is broke, before a nail is put in a board, we're already looking at about, what was it, about $500,000, $600,000 with the average Puget Sound lot cost and permitting costs. And yet, we have median income able to afford a $300,000 house. The gap in what it takes to build a house and what people can afford is just, I mean, that's just way out of control. How do you find ways? How do you chip away at that? And chipping away is too slow. What's a better word? How do you slash that to make it so that people can get closer to affordability?
Yeah. We need to make more land available. Right now, the cost of buying one single lot, one small lot, in those 5 or 6 Puget Sound area counties is almost $300,000 just for the lot itself. Then when you add in the regulatory costs, which we calculate to be about $200,000 right now per home on average in an average jurisdiction, and that's state costs, county costs, city costs, and as I said, their impact fees, their permit costs, and those come from both on the land development side as well as on the construction of the home side. You're into $500,000 for a house before you even turn one shovel of dirt. So, you add in then obviously, the materials and the labor and all that goes along with actually building the house. There is no way that you can even build a house for the median household income of with a purchase price of $300,000 when you're into it, when a builder's into it $500,000 already before they turn a shovel of dirt. So that's the problem. We need more land availability to build housing, and the constraint through the Growth Management Act that has been put on land supply with very few alterations of those urban growth areas over 30 years of Growth Management Act. When you artificially constrain that land, it drives up the cost of that land, and ultimately drives up the cost of those homes.
This is something that I know we'll get into some of the pieces of legislation that we're trying to chip away at some of these issues and problems in a little bit. But one of the things I like to point out is, if you have a problem that's this severe, one of the things you want to do is not make it worse. And it reminds me of, we talked about the transportation budget a couple of weeks ago, and we have this massive deficit in terms of caring for the roads and bridges that we already have. And so we're falling farther and farther behind. And yet, we prioritize other spending that does not do that maintenance. It's like if you owned an automobile that really needed an oil change, and you didn't quite want to spend the money on the oil change, so instead you're buying air fresheners and some seat covers that look nice for yourself, instead of dealing with the thing that keeps the car running, period. And when you've kicked the can down the road for so long, you've got to just focus on that basic priority, and that urgency, that sense of urgency is wildly missing in policy in this state. Let's take a look at your
Well, that's exactly it, David. And I will say the fundamental flaw of the Growth Management Act is that there's no accountability around the housing goal. In the GMA, there are a number of different goals. There's a goal to protect rural areas. There's goal to protect environmentally sensitive areas. There's accountability on all of those different goals, but there's no accountability on housing affordability. There's a goal in GMA of protecting housing affordability, but there's no mechanism in place to hold local jurisdictions accountable to meeting their growth targets. And there's no accountability at all, or there's no leverage to open up GMA or to move the UGAs if housing affordability gets to become unaffordable, which is where we are. There's no mechanism that would then alleviate that constraint to address this issue. So that's been the fundamental flaw of GMA all the way along.
Yeah, if there's no teeth to that accountability, there's really no accountability. It just won't happen.
That's right.
So let's take a look at the third presentation that BIAW put together. This is the regulatory costs there. Walk us through this breakdown of costs, because it blows my mind every time I look at it and think about what I purchased with my home.
Yeah. So this is the median price of a new home. So the median price, as I mentioned before, was of all home sales was just under 600,000. Right now, median price of a new home statewide is almost $700,000. Certainly much more in the Puget Sound area. But you can see the total cost of regulation there, and that's the last two numbers, the 83,000 and the 120,000. And this is costs that are state fees, their local impact fees, their local permit fees, their permit delays. All of that type of regulation now is averaging $200,000 per home. So about a little less than 30% of every new home is just in regulation. And this does not account for the regulation, the GMA, that artificially has been driving up land prices. So when you factor in the cost of land into this, plus the cost of regulation, as I talked about, suddenly you're at $500,000 in the Puget Sound area before you even turn a shovel of dirt. So it's a little less in some of the other outlying counties. And this median price is a statewide number, not just in those few counties. But the median price in King County, as you saw from that affordability index, now is almost 100 or almost 1 million. It's over $900,000 for the median price of any home. The median price of a new home in King County is now over $1 million. So, and it is the cost of regulation where we could provide some relief in bringing some of these costs down if government was willing to do it.
Now, this might be a bit of a gotcha question, and I don't mean it that way, but where do you think this number should be? Where, obviously regulation's always going to cost something, but
Yes.
is there a comparison? Are there other places that give you an idea of what what an acceptable or what a reasonable
Yeah.
cost would be?
Well, if you look nationwide, this is about 10% higher than the nationwide average. But I wouldn't look nationwide. I think we've got to look at states that are doing it right, like the state of Texas, state of Arizona, so some of the other southern states, where this number is about half of what it is in the state of Washington. So, that should be our goal, is to cut this number in half. And you can see that that would bring ultimately the sales price down. But then we also need to address the land supply issue. And if we could address both of those, bring the cost of regulation down and increase land supply to bring land prices back down, we could get this overall cost of a new home back down to being more affordable to a larger number of people. As I said at the beginning, to have a healthy housing market, you want about 60% of your population to be able to afford a mortgage on a medium price home. We are now, less than a third of that that can afford to purchase a new home in Washington. So we've got a lot of work to do. This is a complicated issue. I agree. We've got the supply problem, and we've got this land problem, this land availability problem that needs to be addressed. And then we've also got the cost of regulation that needs to be addressed. If we can, tackle all three at once, we can get a handle and make home ownership more accessible to more people in Washington, which is what it should be. Return it back to where it was literally just 20 or 30 years ago. Back in 2002, just less than 25 years ago, the median price of a home in the state of Washington was $188,000. So in, 21 years, 22 years, we have tripled that, more than tripled that. From 2002 to 2012, the price of the median price of a home increased about 25%, which is reasonable. From 2012 to 2024, it nearly tripled. It went up 170%. So, and again, that's because these policies compound on each other. When you've constrained land supply and you keep it constrained, and land becomes less and less available, that price goes up. And so that and regulatory costs that the state and local governments have been adding are the reason that housing prices have dramatically increased over the last 10 to 12 years.
Our special guest today is Greg Lane. He's the Executive Vice President of the BIAW, the Building Industry Association of Washington. We're talking about housing affordability, or more accurately, the lack thereof in Washington State. Some of you have put some questions in the chat box. If you can, put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll get to those in a moment. I'm gonna go through a couple in the chat box just to weed them out so we can start fresh with the Q&A box. One, there was a request. Have you ever done the housing affordability interactive map city by city? That might be more work than you guys have staff.
Yeah, that gets a little tough to track in all the different jurisdictions. So county by county is as far as we're willing to go. Though I will say the way we're structured, we have 14 local associations. And I should say, just tell you a little bit about BIW. BIW is the largest trade association in the state of Washington. We represent 8,200 member companies who are all connected in some way to residential construction. And that's everything from your general contractor to your trade subcontractors, electricians, plumbers, all that, as well as marketing people, mortgage people, banks, anybody associated with the whole industry of building and selling homes is part of BIW. And our mission is to increase access to home ownership, and that is the goal of our organization. We have 14 local associations that also operate around the state in every community. And a lot of them have more local data, but since we're the state organization, we track it a little bit more statewide, and that's why we do it county by county.
Next question, could allowing multifamily housing in more areas be a good solution to decreasing housing costs?
It is part of the solution, and rents have gone up dramatically as well, because there is a shortage of rental units as well. We need all types of housing. And I mentioned condos earlier, and the limitations on condo construction over the last 20 years, driven by changes that the attorney community passed to make it easier to sue contractors who build condo housing, has basically taken condos out of the Washington housing market, and condos in particular, multifamily ownership opportunities for condos. That place that fills in the housing ecosystem is really critical, and we have dramatically reduced the number of condos that we are building and should be available, because condos operate both as an entry level from rental into home ownership, into ownership. And on the back end, it allows people who've retired and want to downsize an opportunity to continue owning what they where they live, but in a smaller smaller unit, smaller complex, without all the costs associated. I mean, with maintaining a household on a single family lot. But because people don't have that opportunity, they're staying in their homes much longer, and those homes don't become available for families moving up. So all of this is connected together. We certainly do need more rental multifamily, but we really need multifamily ownership to be a part of that housing ladder. We can't pick one solution. It has to be multiple ways of getting at this. And that's one of the problems with the legislative approach to this, is they're focused almost exclusively on that multifamily rental market as a solution to the housing crisis. And that's not going to solve it. It's only going to trap people into rental unless we offer more opportunities for them to move out of rental into home ownership and the benefits of all that.
Another question from Eric. He writes, is it right to say what portion could afford median homes? Seems like the focus should be on who can purchase a starter home. My kids won't start at the median level.
No, I think that's very fair as well. And again, we offer this as just a way to track it consistently over time. Obviously, there are some homes that are less expensive than the median price, some that are more expensive. But overall, I think it paints that picture when a median price is so far out of reach of the average homeowner, they're even having a hard time getting into any existing homes. And the problem right now is there aren't a whole lot of existing homes that are available. We have a real deficit of that supply. There's a lot of factors in that. Most recently, because of the increase in interest rates, people are staying in their homes much longer than they typically would, because they don't want to go from a 2 or 3% interest rate into a 7% or 6 or 7% rate. So the number of existing homes, not new homes, but existing homes that are on the market right now is very small, and unhealthily so. So that opportunity for that first-time home buyer is only in existing homes, really not in new construction for the reasons I outlined earlier. But there's fewer and fewer of those existing homes right now for first-time home buyers to get into. And if you live in the Puget Sound area, you know what? I mean, I'll just use my kids as an example. I have two older kids who are in their 30s. One of them, because he and his wife are, have a median income together of almost $400,000, they were able to buy a home in Edmonds. Very fortunate that they have that, but they've have that median income. My second son and his wife had to move to the Tri-Cities to find a home to be able to buy to start their family. So it's, I really want these opportunities. I think kids deserve in these generations to have their opportunities to buy homes where they were born and raised. They want to stay in these communities. They want to live in the communities in which they work, where there are employment opportunities. And we're preventing that from being able to happen. We're forcing them again, we're trapping them into renting longer and longer as opposed to giving them the opportunity to buy.
Yeah, my first home was in Edmonds, and I
Yeah.
can tell you, it was a 740 square foot home. I think I bought it for $205,000, and it recently sold for 740, and it's still the same small home. So
Yes.
getting a
No,
starter home in Edmonds is not going to be easy.
I tell the story when my son and his wife bought that house, which we were thrilled that they were able to do it. Of course, it suddenly became the most expensive house ever purchased in our family, and the smallest house that was ever purchased in our family. It's only 1,300 square feet. So yeah, it's just crazy.
We'll get back to some questions in a moment. First, I wanted to go through some of the pieces of legislation that we're trying to
Yeah.
chip away at this problem. As you point out, I mean, it's a funny thing. People look for one-strike solutions, but oftentimes on a big problem, it's little things that matter. It's kind of like life, right? Your
Yes.
finances go in the pits because of small decisions that you make, and health decisions and the rest. Small decisions matter.
Yes.
So let's go through some of these items. For example, House Bill 1096, which would have allowed homeowners to split lots and be able to sell off portions of their lot that they're not really using. Describe the impact that they were hoping
Yeah.
for and its ultimate fate.
So this gets at an issue that we have not discussed much, and that is that local jurisdictions respond to the NIMBY community, the not in my backyard community, right? And so oftentimes local jurisdictions will put in different restrictions, whether it's zoning restrictions or those types of things, to prevent the density from happening that needs to happen in order to keep up with the number of units. The old adage in housing is people hate two things about growth. They hate sprawl and they hate density. And you can't solve housing without giving in on one of those things, right? And so what happens is you create these urban growth boundaries that limit sprawl, and then local jurisdictions were not accepting the densities required to, one, that they agreed to their housing that they agreed to take. And it's in response to NIMBYs. And they do all these, local jurisdictions do all these sort of different tricks. And the legislature, one of the good things that the legislature has done the last couple of years is they've finally started to hold those local jurisdictions accountable. 2 years ago, they passed a permit processing requirement where they're going to hold jurisdictions accountable to processing permits on a specific timeline with penalties in place. That was great. This is another bill that gets around. A year ago, they passed another bill that forced specific zoning on local jurisdictions. Depending on the size of the jurisdiction, they had to require a certain number of units or allow a certain number of units on a specific lot, depending on the size of the jurisdiction. And then this year, letting property owners split their lot. If they have a large lot, they can split it into two and build 2 units on it, is another step in that direction. So they are making some progress, but as I say, it's, they need to do more reforms and more aggressive reforms to make it happen. But they have been responsive in doing some things, and this bill was very helpful.
How about House Bill 1403, which would have allowed some changes in condo development to make it easier? And with that one, why don't you describe what the problem is right now with
Right.
With developing condos? It seems like Yeah, when I was growing up, it seemed like new condo developments were happening all the time, and now I rarely.
Absolutely. And what happened was I mentioned the trial attorneys got some legislation passed about 15 years ago that allowed them more access to suing developers. And so what happened was as soon as a condo development was finished, an attorney would come in and rally the residents around finding whatever, small defect and then would sue the developer around it. And there absolutely needs to be some accountability, of course, right, around holding the developer accountability to building a quality product. But it got to the point where these lawsuits got so expensive it doesn't pencil out to build condo development. So that just stopped condo development in its tracks in the state of Washington. So the legislature has the last couple of years passed a couple of reforms to help smaller condo units become available and be able to build. And this was a good step in the right direction. House Bill 1403 for condo units that are 12 or fewer units, you can offer as an alternative to being open to a lawsuit if you offer a warranty, what we call a 210 warranty, which we offer on every new house built. They can now get those for small condo units, which then protects them from being sued by attorneys going to the condo owners. So this should help spur some smaller condo unit development, which again is a step in the right direction.
And what about Senate Bill 5148, which would penalize cities and counties for not meeting their housing goals? This is part of the teeth we were talking about earlier.
Yes, I will tell you, this is my favorite bill of the session. And Representative Bateman, who is from the Olympia area, or excuse me, now Senator Bateman, Representative Bateman, she just was moved over into the Senate. She has been just a huge help on housing. She really gets the problems, and she understands that fundamental problem of GMA of no state accountability over local jurisdictions. So this bill, for the first time now, the state will hold accountable local jurisdictions in their comprehensive plan. And every comprehensive plan, they have to include housing targets. And this will penalize through the loss of funding from the state if a local jurisdiction does not meet the housing targets in their comprehensive plan. Finally, some accountability from the state around local jurisdictions meeting the obligation that they agree to take housing units in their jurisdiction. And this is really critical. And it is part of finally this trend over the last 3 or 4 years. And Senator Bateman has been the leader with Representative Barkas on these issues of getting the state to step in and hold local jurisdictions accountable to implementing and building housing units that they have agreed to accommodate.
This seems like a good spot to interject with a question from the audience. It says, it's great to talk about NIMBYism, but as a locally elected official, current residents are not happy at all with proposed increases in density.
Yeah.
We local electeds get to be the fall guys for bad decisions elsewhere.
I totally agree. So here's the problem again. It gets back to, right? Are we gonna stop sprawl, or are we gonna, the only way to stop sprawl is we have to have density. If you don't want density, then we need to have mechanisms to alleviate and move those urban growth boundaries to open up land availability to build more housing units that way. And we've got to have one or the other. And right now, the emphasis is on these tight urban growth boundaries, which require density to meet the housing unit targets. I'm totally open to either, but right now, that's the decision that state policymakers have made. And I know it puts the onus on those local elected officials who hear from their residents who don't want the density. I get the political problem, and it's been a political problem for 30 years. If nothing else now, you as a local elected official can point to the legislature and say, they're forcing us to do this. We have to comply or we're going to, lose funding. So you can point to them now as the bad guy And maybe that's, is a little long overdue. I wish the state would have stepped in a little bit earlier. I get the problem. But if you are a local elected official that is, worried, your constituents are worried about changing the environment of their neighborhoods and they're worried about density in their neighborhoods, then you should be advocating to move the urban growth boundary because that's the only other option we have to addressing housing affordability.
It also feels to me like I had a discussion with a Tacoma elected official who's now seeking some higher office, I think, and that there's a lot of times where elected officials act like there's only one solution. Like, you want to reduce density, well, we got to put, giant condos right in the middle of a single family home neighborhood
Right.
instead of allowing easier mother-in-law units or easier expansion,
Correct.
more building area on the lot to expand how many people could live in it.
Yes.
Just little things that matter a great deal, but people, there's a lot of I think policymakers and others that they're almost looking for opportunities to fail or make people angry about the changes. I mean, Tacoma's a good example because it's such a sprawling area. There's so many places where, higher density would not be a problem, for the neighborhood, but instead, the target is for these
Yeah.
other smaller single family homes in kind of traditional, craftsman area neighborhoods or something that is going to get all the community up in arms.
Correct. And, it is taking those, third of an acre lots or half acre lots that were traditional before and allowing those to be split up into 2 or 4 different single family units. Or architecturally, I would challenge people to, drive through some of these newer neighborhoods with the higher density, and really even recognize what is a row of townhouses as opposed to a smaller lot, single family, single standing units. Our builders and our architects are able to design them in a way that they fit the fabric of neighborhoods. Yes, they are higher density. And I know there are other problems that go along with it. There's traffic problems, school crowding, and there are certainly other aspects to the issue, but ultimately we've got to get a handle on housing affordability, because again, if we're trapping everyone, and would be my challenge to elected officials, right? Communities suffer when they rely on a vast majority of rental residents in their community because people who own consider themselves to have a stake in the community. People who rent don't feel that same way, and it's just the nature of the beast. When you don't own something, you don't have an internal motivation to upkeep and invest and keep that place of value because it's yours. You don't have that same feeling when you're renting, and so if you're relying on just rental units to solve the housing crisis, those are going to cause a lot of other social and economic problems down the road, for those elected officials. So, I would encourage them to look at higher density, that's home ownership opportunities. We need rentals to be part of the mix, but we can't rely solely on rental multifamily housing to solve this.
There's a question from Betsy. Does BIAW have a Growth Management Act amendments ready to present to legislators and staff to adopt and implement during the 2026 session?
We do. Well, we've been talking to legislators a long time. I will tell you, this is a third rail for the vast majority of legislators, even moderates on the Democratic side, like Senator Bateman or Lieutenant Governor Heck, who's been tremendously helpful on housing issues. When it comes to growth management, we get a different discussion from them, and it's because the environmental community, it is they are just adamant that growth management is not going to be changed, not going to be reformed for this. And so they are extremely aggressive at protecting GMA, at challenging every proposed either amendment to GMA or amendment to any urban growth area. They challenge it to the Growth Management Hearings Board, which is also not a friendly organization or not a friendly legal entity to these challenges. So it is really difficult. And I will say, what we're trying to focus on again is this affordability. If Democrats represent constituents, they say they care about constituents, and I think they're sincere in this, of course, in the middle, lower middle income, upper middle income people, working families who are working every single day in jobs they should be able to live close to where they live and work. And so we're really trying to educate them on the consequences of these policies and what is happening to price all of those folks out from being able to achieve owning the place that they live in. And they're open to some of that. The challenge gets to be what's the solution. And we are getting some bills again that help on the margins. We have not yet been able to convince them that we need to take a serious look at the Growth Management Act, and add some reforms in there to address the land availability problem. I hope we'll continue those conversations, continuing educating folks. The Policy Center has been helpful in putting out information. We have our research center that we developed that puts out just factual data that we can use and point to, and that's been very helpful. But we really need to open some of these legislators' eyes that they are having real consequences for the constituents they say they care about, that they represent.
Greg, I'm looking at the clock and the time has just flown through. And I mean, one of the primary reasons of having you on was to talk about Initiative 2066 and natural gas and what's happened with that in the courts. We don't really have time to do it justice, so we're going to have you back on. But I would like, if you would, just a synopsis of where we're at.
Yeah.
With that. And first of all, I just want to congratulate your organization for spearheading that effort, because as it was funny, because when I first read about it, I thought I just put in an insert and now they want to get rid of natural gas.
Yes.
Yeah. So
well, the big news today is we are filing the appeal to the state Supreme Court today. And we expect the state Supreme Court will take up the appeal. They have never denied a constitutional appeal on an initiative like this, so we expect that they will take it up. We are frustrated that the delay that the judge in King County, when she made her ruling, and keep in mind this was a judge appointed by Governor Jay Inslee, an ideologue who was biased from the beginning in this case, and we knew when it was assigned to her, we had no chance of winning. But when she ruled it was unconstitutional, she delayed for 48 days, 7 weeks, filing the official order. We could not appeal until the final order was actually entered by the judge. Typically, a judge takes 3 to 5 days to enter an order after a ruling from the bench. So I believe it was an intentional delay to keep us out of the Supreme Court for a period of time. We would have, under normal circumstances, been able to get in front of the court in June. Now we're delayed until after their summer recess, so we won't have this hearing before September, and probably won't get a ruling until the end of the year. So it will have been a whole year since the citizens of Washington passed Initiative 2066, nearly 2 million people voting for it, before we'll finally have resolution on this. But we are continuing to fight. We believe in the constitutionality of the initiative. It was written with the sole knowledge that it was going to be challenged on single subject, and we wrote it with that in mind. We're very confident that it meets that test, and are hopeful that the Supreme Court will see it that way. But we have been from the very beginning behind this fight to protect natural gas from being restricted or banned. And that's at the energy code level for new construction. And then when the House passed House Bill 1589, which started the process to ban natural gas to existing customers in the Puget Sound Energy Service area, that's when we filed the initiative. And we collected 546,000 signatures in less than 5 weeks. No one said we could get it done. The response by the public was just overwhelming. And for this King County Superior Court judge, one person to undo all of the support that that initiative had really was really frustrating. But we're continuing the battle, and we'll take it to the Supreme Court and hopefully get a good outcome to protect people and their energy choice moving forward.
Greg Lane, Executive Vice President for the BIAW. Thanks so much for being on Washington Policy on the Go today. Great to have you on, and we hope to have you back again soon.
My pleasure, David. Look forward to it.
All right, thank you, sir. And thank
All
you
right.
for watching, everybody. We'll have this video available on our YouTube channel. Some of you have been asking for the slides, so I'll beg Greg's to grab them so I can, or for permission, so I can put them on a blog to make sure that you can see them at WashingtonPolicy.org. That gonna be okay with you, Greg?
Yes, absolutely. I'd encourage everybody, go to the research center we have at BIW, and you can see all the different reports about the cost of housing, and the central component of that is that housing affordability index, which is right on the front page. People can take a look at that.
Great, and I'll link that stuff up on a blog about
Great.
this program as well, so it'll be easy for you to find. Thanks again, everybody, for watching. Check out the YouTube channel, share this video with others, and spread the news so we can get Washington building, moving, and owning homes again. Appreciate you being on.
If you found this informative, share it with a friend and consider checking out one of our suggested videos over here. Make sure you're subscribed so that you can stay up to date with the latest policy news from Washington.